You recently learned from women on our panel about sexual harassment.
While we have victims or survivors coming forward and saying, "Me too," we need men to say, "I did that." We need men to step forward and to see themselves in these stories. And where are the men at this roundtable that can come and contribute their voices as well?
Well, that was Teen Vogue editor-in-chief Elaine Welteroth. Her invitation for men to join the conversation did not go unanswered. A group of 5 very accomplished men recently took up the epidemic of sexual intimidation in a conversation with Alex Wagner. Alex joins us at the table. Really looking forward to hearing what they had to say.
They had a lot of really interesting things to say. Good morning, guys. The men we met with, as you said, Gayle, they're all leaders in their field, and they are in positions to empower women. The group included writer, director, and producer Judd Apatow, fashion designer Prabal Gurung, former astronaut and sexual assault survivor Leland Melvin, New York Giant Mark Herzlich, whose wife is also a survivor of child abuse and domestic violence, and celebrity chef and restaurateur Tom Colicchio. All of them spoke about moving the Me Too movement forward and its impact on them and their industries. As you watch these stories unfold, every day there is a new story. There is a new Washington Post story, a New York Times story. There's a story on the internet. I'm sure for a lot of men, there's fear, right? Where are you guys as this all unfolds, Judd?
It's certainly a tidal wave that's happening. But I look at it like, isn't it amazing that so many people have felt the need to be silent for so long? How terrible must the environment be that right now, as a result of the internet and as a result of just a confluence of events, people feel safe speaking up.
Just this week, Ken Friedman, Mario Batali, high-profile restaurateurs go down, and yet kitchens are places where this behavior has gone unchecked for decades. So what's the answer here, Tom?
I think, and you're right, it has been going on for decades, and I think the answer is, and I think we're seeing the answer, there's a cultural shift happening right before our eyes right now, and that's where the struggle is. But until we take it a step further and say, what can we do in our industry to make sure those women not only are safe, but economically, there are structures in place that actually can see them thrive.
Men are kind of grouped together from a very young age, and whether it's athletic teams or in locker rooms or fraternities, where you're amongst a collective group of men, there becomes a vernacular that is negative towards women, and there becomes an expectation of other men to place ideology on conquering women.
And Leland, I mean, that brings to the fore the question of sort of masculinity and how young men are indoctrinated at an early age. You have written about this.
I'm a Me Too, and I was 5 years old, and these older kids decided that, hey, we're gonna have fun with this young little boy. And I talk about this in my book because it's like, how can I help other kids get over this? Because so many kids that are abused, they end up, some are abusers themselves or alcoholics or just whatever happens to them after them, especially if they don't get help.
Did you ask yourself those questions though about, how could I have let this happen to me? I mean.
Oh, I did, yeah. I blame myself. I shouldn't have gone over there. I should have fought. I should have done something differently. And I think that's that part of the shame that builds in us that causes cancer in you, that if you don't get it out or have a vehicle to have someone to talk to.
We talk about a lot of this aggression in the context of the victims, and one of the reasons we wanted to have men talk about this is because really men are part of the solution, right? And yet so much of this conversation is among and for women. What is that about, Prabal?
I don't think men are the solution. I really don't think so. I think there needs to be a shift in a thinking of treating women as a weaker sex, that they need to be protected somehow. I'm very fortunate enough to be surrounded by extremely strong women in my life, who don't put up with any of these kind of stuff. And, so I think a man's role becomes a lot about listening. Let me listen to women, not just white women, women of color, trans women, all women across.
Judd, you are surrounded by women at home. What has it been like to be in your house at this moment?
I mean, I have a lot of emotions about it. I feel, a lot of sorrow for my daughters to face a world that is often dangerous. And for a very long time, we talked about, how do you stay safe? And also expecting young men, boys, to be respectful. Like, what do you want from relationships? What do you want from these interactions? You want to be treated well, and if people don't treat you well, they should not be in your world in any way.
And I think that too often, men, especially when they're around women, what they're really concerned about is being humiliated in front of women. And that's where a lot of this starts. And so trying to teach them that you know, a girl in your class is as strong and as smart, and that's okay. That shouldn't humiliate you. You don't have to be better than everybody. When
you talk about a woman's perspective, Mark, your wife is a victim of abuse and was silent about it for a very long time. What did she teach you about the issue?
My wife had domestic violence in her house when she was younger, and she really didn't share it for many years until she felt comfortable around a man for the first time, which was with me. And it was interesting. At that time in my life, I was diagnosed with bone cancer, and I was going through radiation and chemotherapy. My future was looking pretty bad. And when she felt comfortable enough to tell me about the violence that had occurred to her, it was interesting how all those things didn't matter anymore. It didn't matter how I looked or how I felt. I felt more like a man in that moment because it was creating a safe environment for another human.
What should happen to the men who have been accused of sexual predation and harassment? Should you be allowed to have your career back?
I'm least interested in what is going to happen to these men. What I'm interested in is how are we going to empower women? How are we going to change the conversation?
You know, the Louis C.K.'s of the world may not work again because we know him. The idea of him actually going out there and doing something, I think, is going to be rejected by society. But what about that chef who's working at some third-rate hotel in Nebraska somewhere who sexually harassed women, gets outed? He'll just move to another town and no one's going to know his face, and he'll get a job.
So to some degree, this is a conversation about who has power and how power is wielded.
Yeah. And who has power that doesn't do anything. You know, Harvey Weinstein is writing checks to people.
Right.
Bill Cosby is writing checks to people.
Right.
And because he's still making a lot of money, that the powerful people, they're just saying, this is too much of a pain in the ass for me to become the person to shut it down.
Right.
It's a culture change, it's a movement. And you know, the civil rights movement didn't end when we signed the Voters' Rights Act or the Civil Rights Act. It's still continuing. And so I think this is culturally present right now, and I think it's something that we're focused on now, but this is going to take generations to actually fix.
We spent nearly an hour talking with these men and could easily have talked for an hour more. All of them were passionate about this issue and felt not only a duty to be engaged on the issue of sexual harassment, but also a real urgency to help victims and to move the conversation forward. It was incredibly enlightening.
Yeah, they all made really good points.
They did, Norah. I was thinking that too. I love what Judd Apatow said, because it does seem like a tsunami of allegations coming from all over the place in all different sections. And he said how sad it is that so many women in so many different areas felt the need to stay silent for so long.
Thousands and thousands of women who experience this. But we are seeing a sort of reckoning and a seismic shift in terms of how we see gender and how we see power in this country, around the world.
I would like to see how we move on to healing and reconciliation.
Absolutely.
Is there room for second chances? Do you overcome it? And how do you move on from here for both men and women?
Yeah, and the question of what happens to people's careers after this.
And the lessons learned by the next generations coming up.
Absolutely.
Of young boys in particular, about how to be a man and
the ideas of American masculinity are really at the core of all of this.
Yeah. Really good, Alex. Really good discussion.
Happy to do it.